front of me. What was extraordinary about Smita was that she would melt into a crowd. You wouldn't be able to tell her from anybody else. But as soon as she came in front of the camera, she just blossomed. It was quite extraordinary, this blossoming of Smita in front of the camera. Because I remember when I first met her, she was about 19 years of age. She had just made a film with Arun Khopkar, a student film at the FTII. And I saw her and I was struck by the fact that here was someone that had this kind of compelling presence on the screen. And I wanted to meet her. My sound recordist at the time, Hitendra Ghosh, he knew her. He said, of course, definitely you can meet her. She just lives behind your office, actually. So he went and told her that I was interested in seeing her because I wanted to take her in a film. At that time, of course, it was a children's film that I wanted her for, which was called Charandas Chor. And she really didn't want to be in films at all. In fact, it required a fair amount of persuasion, I think, from both her parents to ask her to see me. So when I finally met her, then of course it was much easier. And I put her in Charandas Chor. I wasn't sure how it would work because she was not trained. She'd never done any kind of film except for this little film with Arun Khopkar. And before that, I was told that she had done a little bit of theater and, dance groups and so on and so forth, and different kinds of social situations, social work situations with her mother. But otherwise, she'd done nothing at all that remotely was close to either cinema or theater. And here she was, when she came and I saw her, the first thing that struck me about her was that she was so grounded as a person. When you met her, you could immediately see that she was extremely grounded. And to me, that was the most important thing. And Govind Nelani, who's here, who's also one of our directors, but he was my cameraman, and he noticed that about Smita the first time he saw her. And when we put her in Charandas Chor, which was a children's film, I mean, she was quite extraordinary. She really, she was quite reluctant because she was about to give an examination or something, and we had taken her away from that. But her mother was insistent that she should be in the film and not give it up, because that was her plan, to give up the film. But after that, of course, there was no problem about her being in a film after, which we made called Nishant. And when she acted in Nishant, of course, she became the center of everything. There was Shabana Azmi and there was Smita Patil. And both of them were in that film together, and it was pure electricity that went on there. Not always. Sometimes it would also short circuit, I think. Shabana is here. And these were some of those early problems, but eventually they got along extremely well together. And she gave a very good performance in Isha, just as much as Shabana gave an extraordinary performance in that film. And after that, she acted for a film called Manthan with me. And one particular day, I remember, she had to be dressed up as a village woman. And we were shooting in a village about 45 or 50 kilometers from Rajkot, and this little village. It was a Sunday, and it was pretty hot, and she was sort of sitting in the shade with other village women. And there was a bunch of kids, college kids, who'd come cycling, for so many kilometers from Rajkot, because they'd heard that there was some film unit from Bombay that was making a film there. And they obviously expected, I think, that they would see Amitabh Bachchan. But obviously they didn't see that. They were very disappointed. And then they came around, and I remember one of them whispering to the other behind me, saying, "Who's the heroine of this film?" So someone there pointed out to Smita and said, I think she is the heroine. This fellow looks at him and says, she can't be the heroine. She's just from this village. How can she be the heroine? You know, this kind of thing. It was quite extraordinary about her. The moment she came in front of the camera, of course, it would all suddenly change. Because there was something very spontaneous and very natural about a way she gave a performance. You know, untrained as she was, she had an instinct that was extraordinary. And of course, as she went on, the quality of her work became better and better. And by the time, of course, her very fourth film, which was Bhumika, she'd already won the National Award. And a couple of films later, she'd won the National Award once again, and so on. And in the 10 or 11 years of her as a film actor, she had already done work that most people take a lifetime to do. So that was something about Smita that I'll never forget, because she's quite an extraordinary person, extraordinary actress, and a very, very fine human being. Well, that's what I remember most. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benegal. I would now like.
Much of what I intended to say, Shyam has already said. Mercifully, I've got it written so you know that I didn't copy it. There isn't any light over here, but I'm going to try my best. I first set eyes on her in a diploma film of FTII directed by Arun Khopkar. I think it was called Tivra Madhyam. There was a long shot in which she was playing the Tanpura. I was struck by her raw beauty and the stillness she exuded. She was born for the camera. It lingered over her face, and she held it captive without the slightest effort. Several years later, I met Smita Patil on the sets of Shyam Benegal's Nishant. It was a difficult role for one as young as her. In the film, her husband, Nasiruddin Shah, falls in love with my character, Sushila, kidnaps her, and brings her home. And you had these silent shots of Smita, hurt, resentment, anger, jealousy, and yet unable to see anything because she was trapped in a feudal structure. It is to Shyam Benegal's credit, who understands the complexity of feudal society so well, ably aided, of course, by Vijay Tendulkar, that in two significant but very small but significant scenes, where Smita comes to offer me food, apparently matter of fact, almost resentful, but she brought a layer of such empathy to the plight of the two women bonded together through a patriarchal feudal society that the tears dropped from my eyes without knowing. That is what the crux of film acting is. It is a collaborative effort in which how well you act depends on the support that you get from your co-actor. I have had the pleasure of working with Smita in Nishant, Arth, Mandi, Oonch Neech Beach, in roles far apart from each other. I felt both challenged and inspired by her as a co-actor. We had so much in common. We come from similar backgrounds, were introduced by Shyam Benegal, had similar aesthetics, and worked in the same kind of cinema. Today in public memory, I really think I could well be Shabana Patil and she Smita Azmi, as far as public memory goes. She had a short career span, and yet 29 years after she passed away, parallel cinema in India will never be mentioned without Smita Patil's name in golden letters. We had some fun times together. I'm sure Sham will recall that our film Nishant was chosen as the official selection from India for the Cannes Film Festival. We were given the handsome sum of $8 each to tide through that whole week that we were going to be there. And we were heavily dependent on advertising material which refused to come in a place like Cannes. So Sham Benegal said, listen you girls, I want you to wear your best Kanjivaram sarees and just walk up and down the promenade. This was in 1976. And that's what we did. At 8 o'clock in the morning, with everybody was in shorts and bikinis, we would be wearing our sarees with our bindis and walk, and everybody would look around to look at us, and we would say, we have a film, please come. We've got a film, we are from India, please come. And the house was full. So it worked. Alas, Smita and I could never be friends. The rivalry between us, some of it manufactured by the media, some of it real, caused tension. I have said it before, acknowledged it before, and I do so again, that I have been guilty of making uncharitable remarks about her, and I regret it. There were efforts at reconciliation, and we were able to maintain civility, but it never turned into friendship. But at no point did that spill over to our families. Smita was a star by the time she worked in Sagar Sarhadi's Bazaar, and they were shooting in Hyderabad, and obviously she got the best room in the hotel. 2 weeks later, my mother, Shaukat Kaifi, who had a small but significant part in the film, arrived, by which time Smita had quietly left her room, given it up for my mother, and shifted into a smaller room without letting anybody know. It was weeks later that my mother got to know, and when she protested, Smita would have none of it. That was the kind of graciousness which came to her because she was Shivaji Rao Patil and Vidya Patil's daughter. Ma, Papa, Anita, Manya have embraced me like one of their own. Human relationships are complex, and I'm grateful for the trust they've placed in me. It's a very personal thing that I'm about to share now. There was a time when young Pratik was lost and didn't know what he wanted to do. And Ma and Anita called me and said, we want you to take charge of Pratik. Need I say more? I'm fond of saying that India is a country that lives in several centuries simultaneously and is full of contradictions. Smita Patil was a microcosm of India, a mix of contradictions. She was traditional and modern, strong and fragile, confident and vulnerable. I would watch in amazement as she would drive a jeep with such panache across India with no driver, just a girlfriend. She rode a motorbike like a professional and played volleyball like a champion. She was one of the boys on the sets of Mandi, but she was also very feminine and deeply traditional, and sometimes intimidated easily. I think it's these contradictions that were both her strength and her weakness, but it was also that made her an artist who will always be spoken of when the finest actors of Indian cinema are counted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shabana ji. May I
As Shantanu mentioned, my name is Adit, and I am Smita's nephew. Her accolades and accomplishments are well known and well documented, so I'm going to talk to you about something that's much more personal and much more intimate. I spent the first 5 years of my life, the formative years of my childhood, with Smita, whom I affectionately called Mityama. We lived in Tardeo at the top of Forjet Hill in a beautiful sun-drenched flat. I lived there with Ma, with Papa, and my Aunt Manya, and those were by far the happiest years of my childhood and my entire life. Mityama took me everywhere on shoots, oftentimes telling people I was her son. I even played her child in a few films, notably Tarang. So there I was, my first time on the silver screen, and what was I doing? Sleeping on her shoulders and probably drooling all over her blouse. The years I spent with her, in her arms, in her lap, on airplanes, in cars, on movie sets, and by her side, and in the sunlit veranda of our home in Tardeo, is when I first discovered, for the very first time, how it felt to be truly and deeply loved by somebody. The absolute affection that she bestowed upon me, along with Ma and Papa and my Aunt Manya, built the foundation on which 38 years of my life is built upon. Mityama radiated love like nobody else I have ever come across. I saw it in her eyes, and I felt it in her touch every time she wiped away my tears, every time she ran her hands through my hair as I drifted off to sleep each night. I'm blessed more than I could put into words to be loved in the way that she loved me. And it has made me the person that you see standing before you today. Mityama also never ever forgot who she was and where she came from. There was an instance that I remember with vivid clarity. We were shooting in a small village, and as the shoot wrapped, her Honda Accord was surrounded by hundreds of villagers who had somehow found out she was there. She could have pushed through the crowd and driven away, but instead, after a long day of work, she stood through the sunroof for hours, greeting people, touching their hands, smiling, and speaking to them. Instances like this and many others, I think, really set her apart and make her unique in an industry that's often filled with oversized egos and attitude. Her death was a profound loss for me, as it was for all of you. She had so much more love to give to cinema, to the world, to her friends and family, and especially to Pratik, whose spirit and fire I see in his eyes and in the eyes of my own daughter, who my wife and I named Zoe Smita. I would like to close by quoting noted British philosopher Alan Watts. From time to time, there arises in human beings people that radiate love just as naturally as the sun gives out heat. Happy birthday, Mityama. I love you.
Up the podium, I think it's, Adit, you did that. You made us also emotional. But I'm going to stick to what I'm supposed to be doing with my specs, and yes, there is no light here. I'm going to read out a small paragraph from a little piece that I've written in the book. When I did Fire, my first film that was released, I was often compared to Smita Patil. I didn't even dare take it as a compliment, as I felt the similarity ended with the color of our skin. Although for her, that too fluctuated when she did mainstream films, for which she had to lighten her skin and become glamorous. I could only imagine her struggle in straddling the two worlds of Indian cinema that almost reflected two dramatically opposite expectations, especially from female actors. It was later in 2000 that I realized that there were many more things in common between us. This journey of sisterhood started with my meeting her elder sister, Anita Patil Deshmukh. I met Anita in Chicago for a special screening of Bhavandar, which was being organized by IDS, an NGO she volunteered with. It took us precisely one dinner evening to bond, and from that day, Anita became Tai. Anita became Tai for me, and Smita Patil was not just the actor I admired on screen, but she was Smee, a sister I could never meet. When I heard about her struggle and dilemmas, her simplicity and concerns, her values and passions, it all seemed too familiar. Tai would often draw parallels while talking about her and me, as if she was talking about the same person. Their parents are Ma and Papa for me. This was written when Ma was still with us. And even though I don't meet them as often as I would want to, I hope I'm one of their 2 a.m. calls if they should ever need. In some mystical way, I now feel part of the family. Tai once gave me Smee's silver bracelet, which sadly doesn't fit me. She must have had much thinner, daintier wrists. But it is one of my most precious possessions. There are very few regrets in my life, but my longing for that sister I never met and can never meet is definitely one of them. Smita Patil's place in Indian cinema is unquestionable, and so is Smee's in my life. Now I will read from a chapter that Maithili has written called The Woman Behind the Image. How do you separate the image from the person? Do the two meld into each other at some deep subterranean level? We always felt that the essential Smita is an amalgam of what we have responded to in cinema and learned to treasure, appreciate, and love. So what was Smita